Hey, runners. Welcome to this week's episode of the Fuel Run Recover podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie Natchek, sport dietitian, certified running coach, and personal trainer. We are currently wrapped up on season 3 of the show. Thank you so much for another wonderful season. And not to worry, we will be back for season 4 in early 2026. Until then, I'm so excited to share these re-releases of the top 10 episodes from this past season. So each week we'll be dropping a new re-release from season 3 that hopefully you can catch or give another listen to. If you already heard it once, maybe you'll pick up some new gems this time around. Some of these re-release episodes are fan favorites. So these are the episodes that had the most listens and downloads from you guys, my lovely listeners and subscribers. But some of them are also my personal favorites that I just wanted to reshare. Some of the ones that if you missed the first time around, I really hope you'll tune in and give them a listen this time. I hope in these episodes you're going to find some new gems, maybe some new aha moments when it comes to your nutrition, your training, your recovery, your relationship with food and exercise, or maybe just a little bit of extra motivation to keep you running strong until we're back in 2026. And of course, if you haven't downloaded my new free resource, which is my free fueling audit for runners, definitely head over to the link in the show notes and be sure to get your copy ASAP. This is just a quick checklist that will walk you through the most common signs and symptoms of underfueling in runners and help you identify where the gaps are with your eating habits and where poor nutrition might be holding you back from reaching your full health and performance potential. So once again, head over to the link in the show notes. Definitely grab your free fueling audit. And of course, let me know your score once you're done. All right, let's dive into this week's replay. Enjoy. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Fuel Run Recover podcast, where I'm really excited to bring you this episode all about fatigue and breaking down the different aspects of fatigue and the different things that contribute to fatigue. Essentially answering the question of why can we not sustain any pace we want as a runner for any given length of time? Like, why can't we just run as fast as we want for as long as we want and just keep going forever and ever and ever, right? Like, what are the mechanisms? What are the reasons why we slow down or cannot continue at that pace or effort level? And then most importantly, I want to talk a little bit today as well about what we can do about it. So if you are a runner who struggles a lot with some of these things, whether it's hitting the wall, if you're finding that you're not getting faster at a given distance of race, if you're struggling through, speed workouts or maybe just long runs, what are some things that we can do to essentially fatigue proof your running? Now, of course, even the fastest runners in the world experience fatigue, right? Now, they experience less fatigue at the paces or distances that other people run, right? They have higher thresholds for fatigue than the rest of us. But of course, no one is completely, superhuman that they never ever run into these issues. But how can we start to push that envelope and delay or prevent fatigue during our workouts and races so that we really can continue to push the envelope on performance and improve our times, improve our endurance, and even just improve how we feel during races or during some of those really tough workouts. So that's what we're here to talk about today. And it's an exciting episode. I've been kind of thinking about this for a long time. I've really wanted to do an episode on this topic for a long time. And, sitting down and finally having a little bit of time to get out my thoughts and the questions that I want to answer and the things that I want to share with you, because I think it's a very important topic for runners to understand so that when you're doing your training day to day, you can use some of the techniques, some of the strategies that we're going to talk about to improve your kind of mental resistance or resilience for fatigue. But then also understanding why some of your workouts are maybe set up the way that they are, like why certain workouts are so common in certain race distances and things like that, so that you're understanding the physiological training response that we're trying to get from some of these workouts. And also when it comes to race strategy, why are there certain race pacing strategies that seem to be better than others when, generally speaking? And what is it about those pacing strategies that really seems to help people have
better and just more consistent, solid performances. So there's lots to unpack here, lots of really great conversations that I've been having with my clients lately that, sort of all fed into me wanting to share this information with you. So to start us off, talking fatigue as a runner, just to really quickly define what it is that we're talking about, is basically the inability to continue to sustain a given pace or effort. So we're running at XYZ pace, or we're giving a workout or a run XYZ level of effort, and we just can no longer keep up with that. We have to slow down, we have to stop, we just cannot continue to do that. And this is really what fatigue is all about. And I'm sure every single runner at some point in time, unless you are actually superhuman, you probably have experienced some of these symptoms, right? Or some of these signs. Your legs feel heavy. People will say their legs feel heavy. Legs feel like cement, unresponsive. You have no pep in your step. Basically, you might be trying to get your legs turning over more quickly. You're trying to pick up your pace, but your legs just don't have anything to give. You also might find that your breathing feels harder than expected, like your breathing rate or your heart rate is higher than you would expect it to be at a given pace or effort level. Physically, you might feel fine. Your legs are okay, your breathing is okay, but mentally, you are just feeling kind of blah. Your motivation to continue is waning. If you've ever done like a very long run on the treadmill, you probably know what I'm talking about, right? Say running 10 miles outside on a beautiful spring day, like the motivation and the enjoyment of that is no problem, right? But try to do that same workout on a treadmill, maybe with, no entertainment, no music or distractions or anything. And our motivation to continue can wane pretty quickly. Or again, you've got that drive to maintain pace, and you've got that drive to continue at a specific effort level, but you're just slowing down. Like you just cannot keep up with what you're trying to do. And what's really important to understand here, right, is that these are a combination of both mental and physical, psychological and physiological things that are occurring, right? It's not just a matter of, okay, our leg muscles or our cardiovascular system cannot keep up with the demand, right? Because there are a lot of times that we as runners have done a run before, but this time today, this particular situation, we're feeling that fatigue. So we know physically we're capable of doing certain things. It's just, why are we not able to do it all the time consistently? And, it's not just that our muscles are failing us, that our muscles just can't do it, that it's not always just coming down to our legs. There's this very interesting and complex relationship between all of these different body systems that are working together when we exercise, when we run, that any one of them can be the point at which that fatigue is sort of starting, or the point, kind of the weak link in the chain, essentially, that is driving that fatigue process. And so if we're able to strengthen or correct one of those, those weak links in that system, then of course we're going to be much more fatigue resistant and be able to break through some of those ceilings that we might be struggling with. Of course, at some point though, we are going to reach another weak link. We're going to reach another ceiling somewhere. But to get into all of that and get into these different models of fatigue and kind of where the fatigue is coming from and what's going on with these different body systems, we've got two different things going on, right? We have the cardiovascular system. So we can't run as fast as we want for as long as we want because cardiovascularly speaking, we are not fit enough, strong enough cardiovascularly speaking in order to do that. And to think of it this way, our working muscles, our muscles all the time, but our working muscles need oxygen and they need fuel, right? Which is going to be either fats or carbohydrates to generate ATP. And ATP is the energy that our cells are using, that our cells are making in order to keep us going, right? In order to fuel the muscle contraction and the continuation of that activity. And so the demand for oxygen and fuel increases from rest to exercise. And then from exercise to more intense exercise, i.e., faster running, the demand for oxygen and fuel increases. So we need these things, just rest, just sitting around living, we need small amounts of these things. But then as we start to increase in intensity, increase that demand, the cardiovascular system has to keep up. And this is why we start to breathe heavier, breathe deeper, and our heart rate increases as we exercise. So now we are taking in more bigger, deeper breaths. So we're taking in more oxygen, and our heart is beating faster. And the heart is what is pumping that blood, oxygenated blood and fuel around the body, delivering it to our working cells. Now, of course, our cardiovascular system has a ceiling, right? There is only so much oxygen that we as individuals are able to take in. And this is what you may have heard of referred to as your VO2 max, right? It's the maximum volume of oxygen that you are able to consume. Now, of course, if you are someone who is more fit, essentially has a higher VO2 max. Now, VO2 max is not always the perfect indicator of like fitness, or if you've got two runners with two different VO2 maxes in, say, a marathon, the person with a higher VO2 max does not always come out on top. Like it's not the one and done when it comes to performance. So it isn't all about the VO2 max. But if we're strictly talking about like the cardiovascular system and that fitness and demand for those nutrients, of course, VO2 max is going to be this key indicator. And essentially, when the demand exceeds the supply, right, the oxygen and the fuel that we can supply, we reach that point of fatigue, right? We cannot continue because we cannot keep up with the need for oxygen and fuel in order to keep producing energy at that rate. So, one of the reasons that we can't run as fast as we want for as long as we want is because we just don't have the cardiovascular system, the fitness in our cardiovascular system, in order to do that. So if we become more fit, right, and this just comes down to training, and if we do more training, then that ceiling is going to be increased, right? We also can become more efficient. And so now, again, we're changing the demand and reducing the requirement for some of these things. We're increasing our efficiency. And so that also can do good things for allowing us to run faster, run longer without reaching that point of fatigue. But really, from that perspective, it all comes down to doing the physical training in order to get there. So then we have some other aspects, though, of fatigue, right? Because of course, it doesn't all just come down to cardiovascular fitness. Because if it all, every single time, just came down to cardiovascular fitness, then we would always be able to do everything that we're capable of, right? Like we would always be able to push the boundary, always be able to repeat a workout, always able to, complete things that we've done previously. But that some days a 3-mile run feels like a 10-mile run. And then other days, a 3-mile run feels like, oh my gosh, where did the time go? I can't believe I already got through that, right? Some days you can run faster. Some days you have to run slower. Sometimes, you just don't have that motivation, right? Running outside maybe versus on the treadmill, or running with a friend versus by yourself, having music or not. Like there's lots of other things that impact fatigue and impact our feelings of fatigue. Again, whether they are physiological, right? Something that is happening inside our body systems, or psychological, which also, may be more modifiable at times, like how we feel mentally are things that we sometimes with practice can have a little bit more control over, essentially, when we run, but they are still important things that essentially can make or break a race day performance. So, physiologically, we need to do the training. We need to look at hydration. We need to look at pacing and all of these important aspects. But I think the mental side of it is very often overlooked, but equally as critical to reducing the chance of us running into fatigue or having issues with fatigue that are going to essentially stop us from reaching our goals. So the first, model of fatigue here that I want to just touch on is going to be peripheral fatigue. And peripheral fatigue is essentially the fatigue that is caused by the depletion of glycogen in our muscles, dehydration in our working muscles, and the buildup of lactate in our bloodstream and in our muscle cells. So essentially, what happens is as we're running, right? We're running and we are using up our body's energy stores, right? So glycogen levels are being depleted. And so we can deplete muscle glycogen to the point where we essentially run out of it or reach these critically low levels where then the body can no longer continue to work because we have run out of gas. Right? It's like if you run your car out of gas, there's no gas left in the tank, there's no energy left to burn, there's nothing here. And so we run out of that muscle glycogen. We cannot continue at that same pace. Now, of course, yes, we also use fat as a fuel source, but we cannot use fat as a primary fuel source at the same intensity that we do carbohydrate, which is muscle glycogen. So in order to shift gears and burn fat and be able to rely on fat, we have no choice but to slow down. So that peak, that sort of maximum effort that we can give is lowered when we don't have muscle glycogen available. And then, of course, the metabolism of glycogen, right? The breakdown of that muscle glycogen for energy leads us to accumulate lactate. And lactate is also, you'll sometimes hear it referred to as lactic acid, and it's acidic, meaning that it has hydrogen ions as part of its structure. And so this lactate or lactic acid is rising as a result of this quick breakdown of carbohydrate, this quick breakdown of glycogen. And we are able to recycle lactate, and we have a separate system and a separate pathway in the body that lactate goes through in order for us to be able to turn it into usable energy. But of course, this system has limits too. And if we are breaking down and creating lactate at a faster pace than we can deal with it, at a faster rate than we can clear it, again, we reach something called our lactate threshold. And we are no longer able to continue beyond that, right? The amount of lactate has built up beyond what we can remove from our bloodstream. And we see those hydrogen ions increase to the point where it is reducing the pH in our working muscles, and we lose the ability to have our muscles contract at the same rate. Then, of course, dehydration can play a role here too, where when we start to become dehydrated, our muscles are also going to have issues with that contractility. And so the peripheral fatigue model, sort of this muscle-based model of fatigue, is looking at the depletion of muscle glycogen or the depletion of water, right? The dehydration, which are going to negatively impact our ability to continue, or that buildup of lactate. That is, of course, also going to negatively impact our ability to continue. So this is obviously a huge factor in running, and something that, if we're thinking about hydration, we're thinking about nutrition, supplying more fuel, right? Taking in carbohydrate before and during our run, so we have more carbohydrate, more muscle glycogen available. These are all things that we can do to fatigue proof our running and delay fatigue to the point where maybe we can reach a next level goal of endurance or a next level goal of performance, because we are not basically hitting the wall by running out of gas or becoming so dehydrated that we can't continue. So then we have central fatigue, and central fatigue is coming from the brain. So peripheral is like the outer part of our body, right? The part that's further away from the brain, our working muscles when we're running. Central fatigue is coming from the brain. And so, of course, there's a couple different angles going on here, a couple different things that are happening. When we are running for a really long time, we see a depletion of neurotransmitters, things like serotonin and dopamine, that affect motivation, the rate of perceived exertion, and our ability to continue with pacing. So, the brain gets tired, and these neurotransmitters that have been, very active and, putting in a lot of work. Our brain has been working really hard to keep us running, keep, all these different body parts moving in sync and the coordination of things. And, like the brain is very active when we're running. And so we start to get fatigued. Now, some of this, of course, nutrition can play a role here too, in terms of brain function, energy going to the brain, because of course the brain uses a tremendous amount of glucose for energy throughout the day, but then also nutrients that we consume, things like choline that actually are part of neurotransmitter production. So then we have the thought of fatigue also being a protective mechanism. The human brain is essentially hardwired to want to prevent us from doing things that are going to cause irreparable damage or complete catastrophic exhaustion, right? Like our brain puts limits on what we do, and our brain puts limits on what we feel we're able to do outside of course, very extreme situations, because it is trying to keep us safe, right? Our brain is trying to protect us. And so if the brain is sensing that, continuing is going to cause significant muscle damage, cardiovascular risk, exhaustion, heat illness, whatever it might be, then we can experience fatigue sooner because of these protective mechanisms that we have in the brain. And this sort of feeds into something called the central governor theory. And essentially, the central governor theory is stating that the brain acts as sort of a regulator, right? The regulator is there to stop us from doing things that are going to really cause serious damage. And so the brain is constantly during exercise monitoring our body temperature, our rate of perceived exertion, our heart rate, oxygen levels, muscle glycogen levels, hydration, and of course, assessing how much further we have to go. And this is why you find that mentally, in the earlier parts of a race, you might really struggle with pacing, struggle with motivation, struggle with, continuing. And then all of a sudden, when the finish line is like in sight, you're like, boom, all of a sudden you have all this gas left in the tank, and you're just like able to shift gears and really, get that last kick towards the end. Because the risk of that catastrophic failure is much lower when the finish line is right there versus when you're in like the first 10K of your marathon. And so the brain is monitoring all these different things all the time throughout a run, throughout a race, whether it's a speed session or a long run or a race, whatever it might be, and then essentially dials us back and holds us back before we can really cause harm. And so this, of course, is going to occur at a much lower threshold than our true physiological capabilities. And it's fascinating to think about this, that it's your brain that is essentially holding you back from doing the things that you're physically capable of doing on a given day because it's hot, because you're dehydrated, because you don't have enough muscle glycogen on board. And it's not to say that you wouldn't still make it through the task that you have in front of you, right? That race or that workout. It's just a protective mechanism, again, trying to stop you from reaching that point of doing serious damage. So you can see here that between the peripheral model and the central model, right? The central governor theory and the peripheral model, they're so interconnected. And there is no kind of like, okay, it's all one thing or it's all the other thing. It's both of these, whole body systems, our cardiovascular system, our musculoskeletal system, and then of course our central nervous system, all working together to kind of regulate what we're doing. And you can see how based on other different factors like environmental temperature, recovery, muscle damage that we're going into a training session with, nutrition, hydration, etc., how that can really impact how we feel day to day. So just because, last week we did this specific 5-mile run with this tempo effort and that sort of thing, then the next week it feels so much harder. I mean, physically we know we're capable of doing it, but there are different things that can just cause us to hold back or feel the need to hold back at different times. And this is where smart pacing, this is where mindset, and this is where, those mental strategies around fatigue and really helping to create, help to create a more fatigue resistant or fatigue resilient type of runner is so beneficial, because it is about the training and it's about physiologically improving our ability to do things. But then it also comes down to being able to push ourselves and being able to kind of take that governor off when we need to. And, but of course, to still try to avoid catastrophic failure. So then we also have this really other model that I think is so fascinating. It's the psychobiological model. And it is sort of shifting gears a little bit more away from the physical fatigue in the sense of like, what's happening with the brain, what's happening with the muscles, that kind of thing, but really centers the rate of perceived exertion and motivation as like a key limiter of performance. And I think that like all of these things are very valid, and probably different things come to the forefront in different situations and for different runners on different days. But it's not necessarily always about your body failing or your body not being able to keep up, but it's about, in any given situation, how hard does the run feel and how motivated are you to keep going? And it's a really interesting thing to think about. I think it's really interesting to think about, again, because some days the same run can feel so easy, and other days that same run can feel so hard. Like, have you ever had a deload week? I know this happens to me all the time. You're heading into a deload week and you think, oh my gosh, I've been doing all these like 5, 6, 7 mile runs. Oh, my deload week, I'm only doing like 3, 4 miles at a time. Oh, it's going to be so easy. And you go out there for that 3 mile run and you're like, oh, when is this 3 mile run going to be over? And it's like, it just feels so much harder than it should on that day. Whereas other times, if you're, say, used to doing long, long runs, and then all of a sudden you only have to do like a 12 miler on your plan, it's like, oh my gosh, 12 miles. I was in and out. I can't believe how fast that 12 mile run went by, right? Like, it's all about perception, all about motivation, and how hard that run feels in the moment. And it makes such a difference in terms of our levels of fatigue, our motivation, our goals, our self-talk, right? Our mindset and the things that we're saying to ourselves. All of these are going to influence, how long, how hard we can push before we're finding ourselves slowing down or stopping. And while I think this model is very important to understand, and I think it's a huge part of what we're talking about here today, is this like mindset and beliefs and self-talk and all of that really can make or break a performance on any given day. But of course, we also know that like it's hard to self-talk your way out of hitting the wall because of glycogen depletion. Like I think it's not a one or the other thing. It's all of these factors together, and all of these factors being so intertwined. It would be, in my opinion, completely impossible to separate out one to say, okay, this one is the most important thing. Like, this is the key, because again, on any given day, depending on the environment, all these other factors, different things are going to come to the forefront. So, really fatigue is, of course, multifactorial. It's all these systems and how they're interacting, right? It's our physiological limits, but then it's also our psychological limits. And this comes down to everything from just our motivation, our rate of perceived exertion, and those protective mechanisms that are all coming into play. And so, we even know, like, even on a day that we have full glycogen stores, right? We ate the same breakfast we always eat. We're not glycogen depleted. If the brain is perceiving that effort as too high, or if glycogen levels are dropping really rapidly during a long run, we have not run out of glycogen yet. But the central governor theory essentially is saying, but you might, right? You may run out of glycogen, right? If you're not taking in, say, any intra-run fuel or intra-run carbohydrate. And so we're going to slow you down. We're going to pull back because we can't keep going at this pace forever. So yes, you could maybe technically complete that run, but the brain is trying to prevent you from getting to that point where you are reaching complete glycogen depletion. So even though you are still running with pretty good glycogen stores on board, it's that future you that the brain is trying to protect you from. And so, really, the big takeaway here, like the big thing that I want you to understand is if you have been struggling with this, right? Like, just whether it's mindset or whether it's hitting the wall, having trouble with certain speed sessions, having trouble with race day pacing, if any of those things are things that are struggles for you, then improving our performance really requires us to address this whole system, right? Each piece of this, and really, again, trying to find those weak links. What are those weak links for you? And then being able to work on those so that everything is kind of up at that same level. I know for me, and I think a lot of runners probably will agree with this. I mean, for me, it's definitely the mindset, and it's definitely being able to push myself and continue to push beyond my comfort zone. I think a lot of us in the endurance running space, we are very good at running easy, right? To settle in to that easy pace and just to kind of like enjoy the miles. It feels really good. We get a lot of positive energy from that. For me as a dietitian, I mean, certainly fueling and hydration is not something that I struggle with. I'm very on top of my fueling and hydration. And so when I'm struggling, it's usually a mental struggle, right? And it's usually something with my mindset, with, my motivation on any given day. And sometimes who knows what exactly it is that is preventing me from being able to continue to push. But certainly I struggle a lot more with those, like, say sustained lactate threshold runs, right? Those longer tempo efforts, which I think is true for a lot of people, right? Getting out of our comfort zone and staying out of our comfort zone for a longer period of time. Okay. So next we're going to talk about specific strategies, specific things that we can do in order to delay or even prevent fatigue from negatively impacting our workouts, our long runs, and our races. Now, of course, the first big one, looking at these physical strategies, fueling before and during your run, right? We don't want something as silly as glycogen depletion being the reason that you are not able to continue at the pace you want for the distance that you want, right? This is going to be eating a high carb pre-run meal, carb loading for those longer races, and including intra-run fueling for runs that you're doing that are going to be longer than about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes, right? Anything beyond that, getting in that intra-run fuel. Again, we're aiming for like 60 grams of carbs per hour to sustain energy and continue to tell the brain and show the brain that you have fuel coming in, right? Even just the taste of something sweet in your mouth can give the brain a little bit of a boost, right? We get a little bit of a perk up from the brain getting that sweet taste and sort of telling the brain that there is energy coming. There is continued energy going into the system so you can continue to run at this effort because don't worry, we're still putting fuel in. And of course, we really want to avoid starting a run already underfueled or with those minimal glycogen stores because of course it's just going to it's going to just accelerate the onset of fatigue, right? So we want to make sure we're fueling up well before and fueling during those runs so that we're giving ourselves enough gas to even have a hope in hell of doing what we set out to do. And then including hydration and electrolytes in our plan where we need to. So like certainly sipping on water during most of your training runs, including electrolytes for those warmer weather runs, or of course, if we are going to be out there for longer as well. So anytime you're fueling, including electrolytes along with it is a great idea. And you should just always be in the habit of sipping fluids during your runs. The next thing is, doing the training. Putting the work into doing the training, right? We want to do not just our aerobic training, right? The base building types of runs, putting in a lot of time into that easy conversational effort type of pacing, but also things like strength training, and then of course doing the speed work at the level that you're currently at and slowly building on our ability to push and delay fatigue through our ability to improve things like lactate use and improving our lactate threshold and that lactate system so that we're able to push the envelope physiologically speaking, when it comes to our pacing. So we want to do a lot of that aerobic training so that we are more efficient. We are making better use of oxygen. We are able to rely more on fat as a fuel source, one of the other benefits of aerobic training, and reduce our reliance on switching to those anaerobic systems too soon or too early. So we want to have a really solid aerobic base, and we want to make sure that we are doing that type of training, but we can't forget and leave the speed work out of it entirely, because of course the only way we're going to get better at things like, improve our VO2 max or improve our lactate threshold is by also doing workouts in that space too, and not getting intimidated by it. We also, of course, need to look at recovery between workouts and really understand that as an important part of fatigue as well. And fatigue can be something that also accumulates over time, right? Especially when it comes to things like nutrition, when it comes to things like muscle damage, electrolyte imbalances that are reducing our muscle contractility, right? Reducing our ability for those muscles to contract at the rate or at the level of endurance that we really need to perform well. And so if we are in a constant state of overtraining, if we are not getting that recovery that we need, and again, whether it is from a lack of nutrition, whether it is from just not taking rest days, doing those hard days too hard, etc., we just have damaged muscles that then we're working again. And now we're trying to do more muscle damage on a muscle that's already under recovered. And then it's just more damage on top of more damage on top of more damage until we're going to reach a point that our performance really starts to suffer. And so respecting recovery and making sure that we are taking those rest days and getting the recovery time that we need between hard workouts can really do wonders for our ability to be more fatigue proof. So then we have the mental strategies, right? So that's all the physical stuff, the physiological stuff, right? The nutrition, hydration, rest, doing the right type of training for your goals, and really assessing where is it that I feel like I need the most help, focusing on that. Then we have the mental side of things, right? That mindset, that motivation, the self-talk, and the things that are not physically holding us back, but certainly can negatively impact us on any given day, and is a huge reason why one day a run feels great and the next time we do that same run, we just cannot seem to make it through. It's like, what is going on here? And different people will find different things work for them. So I really highly recommend thinking about all of these different things, trying to figure out what would work best for you, or what do you feel like you need. Take what you need from this list, and then of course leave what you don't, or come back to it at a future time. And the first one that can be really helpful is breaking the run down into smaller chunks or smaller goals, right? Not looking ahead and getting really intimidated by either the race that you have coming up and already, oh, how am I going to do this? Oh my goodness, I don't know how I'm going to run this race on this day, and starting to spiral when you're just starting a training program. How am I ever going to run this marathon at this goal pace? It's like you've got 4 or 5 months of training to go. Focus on the workout that's right in front of you, right? And even breaking it down further, focus on the next minute or 2 minutes or mile or whatever it might be. Break it down into just the thing that you're focusing on right now, right? Break it into much, much smaller goals and consistently check off those. Those are the steps that build up towards the big thing that we want to achieve. And this can really help, with our effort level and our rate of perceived effort, and improve our motivation. Breaking those big goals down into smaller goals, we're going to get more wins more often, right? So we're going to be able to check off and get more gold stars basically more often, rather than it being just grinding until the big thing we accomplish. And motivation is something that comes and goes, but we want to take advantage of the times when we are feeling really motivated and capitalize on that, knowing though that when we aren't feeling as motivated, we have other things that we can dig into in order to continue to be successful. The next thing, and I think that this is a huge one, is using positive self-talk. Catching yourself and being very aware of the things that you're saying to yourself during a run, especially during a hard workout or a hard race. And I think it's important to also recognize though that the going will always get tough. Like we're not trying to replace negative self-talk with positive self-talk from like a toxic positivity standpoint of like everything is sunshines and rainbows all the time, and if it isn't, then we're not even touching it. But it's to know that there are going to be low points, there are going to be tough pieces of speed sessions, of long runs, of races. If we're challenging ourselves, then it's going to be challenging. And so we want to go into it anticipating those challenges, but having strategies to pull ourselves out. And whether we have just simple phrases, like people just want to repeat, I've got this, I can do this, I'm strong, whatever it might be for you. Sometimes I like when I'm doing a speed session, I don't know, maybe this is embarrassing to share. I don't know. When I'm doing a speed session and, I'm getting to that point where my effort level is high, I sometimes will repeat to myself, I feel great. And I really try to internalize and think about how good I feel, how strong I feel running fast. My heart rate is high, my breathing is elevated, my rate of perceived exertion is up there, but it feels great. And it helps a lot. It helps a lot. And trying to remember, I like to think of the training benefits that I'm getting from doing those harder sessions. Like I try to, again, maybe this is embarrassing, I don't know. I try to like think and visualize the positive things that are happening in my body as I'm doing these hard workouts. Like I'm imagining myself getting better at clearing lactate from I'm imagining my running getting more efficient. I'm imagining the improvements in my cardiovascular fitness. Like I'm thinking about the positive, great things that I'm doing for myself as a runner, getting through that speed workout. And then how good and strong I feel, even though I am working hard. And I find that really helps me to push through those harder efforts that are not like all out sprints where it's just like a short duration and it's kind of over before you sort of even realize it. But when you're getting into like, the last 5 minutes of a 20-minute threshold type of effort, like those last couple minutes are starting to get really tough. But I always like to imagine, this is the part where I'm getting all these benefits. Like this is the part where my fitness and my body and everything is really changing. So that's me. And what's interesting is that if we look at it from a research perspective, things like positive self-talk really does improve performance. Like it has an incredibly powerful impact on how we feel, our motivation, our rate of perceived exertion, and can really do wonders for improving performance. So if you are the kind of runner who does tend to get stuck in the negative self-talk, a lot of self-doubt, a lot of questioning yourself, just the things that you're saying to each other are not positive, good, affirming type of things, then just try for the next little while, really making a conscious effort to repeat positive affirmations and simple phrases that are, more positive self-talk. Even if it means like writing something down on your hand, writing something down on your arm. If you're running on the treadmill, like put it on a piece of paper in front of the treadmill or somewhere that you can see it and repeat it like to the point where you feel silly, but if you say it again and again and again and again, eventually you will start to believe it, especially if we're starting to pile up some wins along the way with some better, stronger running performances. Another thing that can really help is, anticipating the challenges like I mentioned and visualizing yourself staying strong during the tough parts of those races. So if looking at the course ahead of time, knowing where am I most likely to struggle? Is it the last 10K of my marathon? Is it those couple of hills that are on the race course? Is it the part of the race course where it gets really zigzaggy and you think that you're going to be almost done right away and then, oh no, there's one more turn? Is it the part of the race? There was a 10K that I did over the winter where you run past the finish line. So you do it's almost like a figure eight. So you go out and then you run and then you come back and then you kind of go past the finish line and run another loop sort of the other direction and then come back. So the great thing is that the bigger loop is first. The second loop is shorter, but I was so happy that my friend who had run this race before said, "Oh yeah, this 10K, like, we did it last year and like you run past the finish line and you have to keep going and you're not done yet." And I was so glad she said that, because if I hadn't, like, the spiral of disappointment that you go through, when you see the finish line and you're like, oh no, like, you're not done yet, right? So training yourself and visualizing yourself like sort of in those tough parts or in those parts of the course where you know that you're going to maybe struggle and you're going to kind of maybe hit that mental low point, and visualizing yourself staying strong, and even just knowing the race course and being able to anticipate the challenging parts of the race course is incredibly important. So that mental rehearsal, that visualization, having a plan of what are you going to do when the going gets tough, right? What are you going to repeat to yourself? What are you going to remember? How are you going to feel calm and confident in those situations? Because if you go into a race thinking and believing that if you've just done a good job of training, everything's going to be easy breezy and sunshine and rainbows, I am here to tell you that that almost never, ever, ever happens. Even if you have nailed your training, right? There's still going to be a point where that race is going to get hard, right? If you're challenging yourself, if you're aiming for a PR, if you're doing something you've never done before, it's not going to be easy. And so we don't want to only stay in our comfort zone and stay safe all the time. We want to break those limits. We want to push through, but we have to know that, with growth comes difficulties. And the more we can get on board with that and have these strategies for getting around it, it's going to help us avoid that panic that can set in, and the panic that we can feel when we start to feel fatigued. Like, I don't know if you've ever done this, but that fatigue starts to creep in a little bit. Our legs start to feel a bit tired. Our heart rate starts to go up a little bit, and we just shut down. We just go full like panic. We don't know how to manage it. We don't know what to do. And so we just immediately hit the slow down button and immediately back off, right? When if we have more of these strategies, anticipating those challenges, having things that we can repeat to ourselves, visualizing those tough parts, then when we inevitably start to feel fatigued, it doesn't become catastrophic, and acknowledging that discomfort, acknowledging getting out of our comfort zone. Like I said, I like to imagine the benefits that I'm getting. I like to imagine myself getting stronger, getting fitter, getting faster. And what are we going to do to continue to be able to push through those tough points? The other thing that can be helpful sometimes, again, we want to be really careful with this point because, of course, recovery is important. We don't want to be constantly accumulating fatigue because there is a point where we reach overtraining, and that is not good. But sometimes training when we are a little bit fatigued, whether that's long runs, running back-to-back days, if we're capping our long runs at about 3 hours, running before, so we have a little bit of fatigue built up in our legs already, can really help to teach us to run on tired legs, and can help to teach us that it is okay. We can keep going even when it is a little bit uncomfortable. But of course, we don't want to do this all the time, always run back-to-back days every single day, or always be pushing the envelope for that volume or that intensity. We want to be careful with not doing too much training in a fatigue state. But there is a time and place sometimes for just mentally being like, wow, you know what? Like, I got through that. So I just had a client this week who he does his long run on Saturday, and then we have another shorter run on the Sunday. And he is currently running 6 days a week because he gets ready for his marathon that's coming up fairly soon. And he did his long run, and it's not quite the longest run he'll do of this training cycle just yet, but then he went and did his normal easy 5-miler the next day, and he reported back when we met the next day and said, wow, like, I've never done that before, like, run 20 miles and then got up the next day and did another 5, and it was fine. Like, it was okay. And to just like that motivation boost, or that kind of ego boost, and not in, it's in a good way, right? That little boost that we get from doing those hard things. It's like, wow, I'm capable. I can do this. And the next time we are posed with any type of challenge, we can draw from that, and we can pull on that. And it's like, it just adds to our mental capabilities and our mental stamina, and teaches us that, yes, we can do hard things. Like, I had a run this week that I was personally very proud of. I didn't have anything specific planned for my speed session, and my Garmin watch will like recommend workouts. I mean, if you have a Garmin, then like it'll just say, "Oh, here's what we think you should do today." And I have no idea what this is necessarily based on. It doesn't know what I'm training for. It doesn't have that much information about me other than my training data. But it had recommended a 16-minute threshold run. I was like, yeah, you know what? Yeah, sure. I'll give that a try. But I looked at the pace that it was recommending, and I thought, oh my gosh, like, I don't even know if I could do that for 5 minutes, never mind 16, right? And I was, but I'll try, right? I'll try, and we'll see. So sure enough, I did this one on the treadmill, and I got going and got up to speed. Oh wow, like this is really fast. But you know what? I did it. And I was so proud of myself for completing this workout, because it was just something that felt very intimidating. It felt like it was too fast for me. I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to handle it or do it. And I'm going to remember that the next time I'm doing something that's challenging me in that way, saying to myself, remember when you thought that you couldn't hold that pace for 5 minutes and you did the full 16, and honestly, like at the end could have kept going for a little bit longer, not a ton longer, but like you could have, like, remember that and use that, and, be able to draw on that when the going gets tough in the future. So when it comes to fatigue, again, fatigue does not mean that we are losing fitness on any given day. It doesn't mean that we are failing. It's just a protective response, either in response to something that's happening in our muscles physiologically, or it's our brain that is trying to stop us from doing something, essentially what it believes or perceives to be very, very stupid. And the key to improving our performance and really kind of increasing our resilience to fatigue and fatigue proofing our running is to look at it from both angles, both the brain and the body, helping them to work together more efficiently to continue to push that envelope on fatigue over time. Sometimes there's a pretty, I'll say, quick fix, quote unquote, which might be nutrition, hydration, a little bit of mindset work. Like, it's amazing the difference that some of those small things can make. Say if you're currently not fueling at all. I have a lot of clients who start working with me that are not fueling at all. And oh my gosh, the difference when they start adding in carbs to their pre and inter run fuel, like day and night, what they're able to accomplish. But with other things like training, visualization and some of that stuff, it's not necessarily an overnight success. But focusing on, assessing where you feel your weak links to be, and focusing on those small, consistent habits that you can do over time to start to build up your resistance or resilience to fatigue and really allow you to reach that next level of performance. Sometimes it's just very small things like our self-talk. What are the things that we're repeating to ourselves when the going gets tough? Have we spent some time visualizing and thinking about when we start to feel that fatigue, how we're managing it, what we're doing about it in those scenarios? Really doing those little things can make a tremendous difference over time and really help you bust through that ceiling of performance at your next race. So that is it for today's episode. I really want to thank you for tuning in today. I hope that you got a lot out of this episode. I hope that you learned some new things. I certainly really enjoyed putting it together for you. And of course, if you are looking for help with your training, with your nutrition, if you need a personalized plan, whether it's, a fueling plan or a running plan, anything like that, I would love to help you. And so you can learn more about how you can work with me inside my online program for runners, the Fuel Train Recover Club, or of course, take advantage of my one-on-one nutrition and run coaching. You can get the details on all of that at the link in the show notes. All right, that is all for today. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me, and we will see you right back here next week. Bye for now.
The information on this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not to be used or relied upon for the diagnosis or treatment of any health condition. This information does not create a client-practitioner relationship and should not be used as a substitute for professional medical advice.